Hola, soy Ruy Arroyo. Bienvenidos a las charlas adictivas del podcast Parlamento. El objetivo principal es tener conversaciones con expertos, especialmente en campos de la psicología y psiquiatría, pero también en otros campos de la ciencia. Personas que reúnen un tema en común: la adicción. Su experiencia puede ayudar a entender este complejo asunto que de una u otra forma cada vez está más presente en la vida de todos. Hi, my name's Ruy Arroyo and you're listening to Charlas Adictivas, Addictive Talks in English version. Today we have the great pleasure to count with our guest Andrew Frankland, 16 years sober. Amongst many other things.
Indeed, yes.
And welcome, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Ruy. It's great.
Just so that we give a little introduction, the idea is that with Andy, we've introduced people with experience in addiction, personal experience, which is very interesting because, as we were talking before, the idea of putting together these two entities that are scientific and, I don't know the word you would use, more people that have gone through it together, no? In order to understand addiction, what it is, because it's quite blurry sometimes, no?
For sure.
And yeah, I think with your experience in your own life, I think we can try to show people what it is really addiction when you go through it, no? Mm-hmm. So we normally ask for your definition of addiction, in the first question, and then we just see where that leads to. If you could give us your idea, how could you describe addiction?
Yeah, I mean it's a very wide question, but I can only really give you my own experience. So for me, addiction, created unmanageability in my life, and so anything in my mind that creates unmanageability in a person's life, and what I'm referring to there is unmanageability in relationships, that would cause one to not be able to work very well, not be able to have social engagement that actually profits your life or moves you forward, that actually can lead someone, in my case, into a position of not actually being able to function with my mind. And so, from the perspective of addiction, that doesn't necessarily mean that, that unmanageability comes from heroin use. That unmanageability could come from literally watching series on TV.
Yeah.
So for me, addiction is not about the substance. It's about what it creates in the person. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that gives you a bit
it does. And I agree. And it's a good point because one of my questions, which I always ask the guests, is if the substance matters, and I don't think it does. I think you have biological preferences or social preferences or accessibility factors that lead to you using one thing or another. But at the end, it's that mechanism of looking for a coping mechanism, for your incapacity to manage emotions or distress, or growing up, changing from scenarios that really no one explains you. With your parents, try, and everybody around you tries for your best, but sometimes it's hard to adapt, and that could lead to emotional scars, which then lead to use, which then leads to abuse, and then suddenly you find yourself going to an NA meeting, without really knowing how that happened. So, I know you have a lot of experience in NA, and I would love to go into that. What is NA? Because people have the idea of what they see in the movies. Hi, I'm an alcoholic, and everybody's like hugging you, and that's about it.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, well, that's basically what it is. But what is NA? I mean, could you tell us a bit about NA?
Yeah, sure. So just to rewind a little bit, maybe it's useful to get a bit of a picture of me and how I came to NA initially. But to directly answer your question, Narcotics Anonymous is founded out of originally out of Alcoholics Anonymous, as many of the anonymous programs exist, but they are all centered around one thing, which is addiction. And, you know, you might have Cocaine Anonymous, you might have Sex Addicts Anonymous, and these are all centered around one thing, and that is that core issue of addiction. And you're quite right, you know, that focuses on, usually comes from some kind of trauma. There is a conversation around nature and nurture. What I mean by that is, you know, is someone inherently picking up addiction? Is it something that they've inherited, or is it something that comes from life experience, you know, as in trauma? I think there's a bit of both. In terms of Narcotics Anonymous, it's a program that allows us to address that unmanageability. And so when we walk through the doors of Narcotics Anonymous, the first thing that we hear is that we are accepted. You know, that there is no fee to pay, you know, that there is no judgment. It's, okay, we're here to help you. And that was something that I didn't expect. You know, I walked in the doors thinking, I've reached the bottom. And, you know, these people are just going to be the bottom of the bottom. But I found a very different thing to that, which we can go into more detail on. In terms of how I got there. So I'm British, as you can tell from my accent. I'm first generation born from a family from Barbados. So my mother was a very young mother. She was 17 when I was born, and subsequently was unable to care for me. She then had at the age of 2, when I was 2, she had another child through a different partner who got meningitis when she was born. So she wasn't caring for me very well. She then had a child with meningitis, so I was given up for adoption. So I spent the first kind of 4 years of my life with a lot of infantile trauma that I didn't know until I got clean. But that was really the beginning of the journey for me. I also just mentioned nurture. So my mother was, when I was in the womb, she was going through trauma as a 17-year-old who had just been, you know, her father wasn't accepting the pregnancy, my grandfather. So she was in a position where she was suffering trauma, which was then passed to me, which I've only learned that as the years have gone on. I start there because I think it's really relevant to the subject of unmanageability. So her unmanageability was passed to me as a baby. It's generational. So then I was adopted. And this is where the story really changes, because I was adopted into a middle-class white family in the suburbs of London. Well, actually in the countryside outside of London. And I was, you know, sent to private schools, and, you know, I had everything. You know, I literally was taken from, you know, what we would describe as poverty into wealth. But in that process, I was also trying to identify. And the issue of identification is a very big part of unmanageability in our lives. If we don't identify with the people around us, with the situations that we're in, we tend to want to move away from those situations. And that was very much the case for me in my adolescence. I started using substances without realizing I was doing this.
What age?
To counter that. My first time I got drunk was, I was 12. My friends and I raided my father's wine cellar, and we got through some pretty expensive wine.
I'm sure he remembers that.
And he's never let me forget it. But, you know, it was a hee-hee-ha-ha moment.
Yeah.
There was nothing more than that. I remember a little bit younger, after parties, my parents' parties, drinking glasses of wine at the end of, or whiskeys or whatever at the end of
you would drink the
little bits left, yeah. And I liked the feeling. And it was naughty. I shouldn't be doing it. So it was exciting. I didn't see that as using at that time. Now I understand that actually the feeling that I was getting was a separation from that identity issue, that issue of who am I, where am I, what am I doing here? And so then the next time was an actual, You know, it was a desire to go and get drunk. This was when I was at school.
What, 14?
14, yeah. I and four of my compadres, we decided to go out of the school on a Saturday morning and go to the local shop. And it's a little village. There's a school of 200 boys down the road, and none of them are over the age to buy alcohol. And this guy quite happily sells us Bacardi and whiskey. And we decided to drink the whole lot and then try to get back to the school. It took us 20 minutes to walk there. It took us 3 hours to get back. But I remember that specifically as the first time that I wanted to go and escape from the feeling. And I was 14, so I was in mid-puberty, adolescence, you know.
Yeah.
And so from that day on, there was a suspension from school. There were parents involved, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But from that day on, I wanted more. And my pursuit of that wasn't every day I have to have this, but the thought of being able to do that again was there because of what it gave me. It gave me this complete separation. The next times were probably every occasion. So sort of, you know, when we were 16 at this school, we had a common room where we were allowed to drink. So our parents gave us money to buy crates of beer to be able to drink. I was one of the rugby players of the school. And so after every match, we were able to do this thing. And for me, it wasn't having a drink, it was getting drunk.
Yeah, the numbness, no?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And so that continued into my... so around the same time, I started going to London with some of the guys there, and we started taking LSD. My first experience of LSD was 2 microdots of this thing. I was 15, so I was I was really young.
Early adopter, no?
Yeah, I was really young, and it just, my brain shifted, you know. And so my academics went down considerably. I only really wanted to focus on the things I enjoyed, and that was playing rugby and chasing girls. You know, there was nothing else I wanted to do, and that's what I did. By the time I was in my 20s, LSD was replaced for MDMA, for these kind of substances. I was raving, I was partying. And at 21, I had my first line of cocaine. And when that happened, the world opened up for my drug use, for my separation, my need to use. I
was the same age, 21, with
right.
cocaine.
Right. And as soon as that hits your system, for many of us that have come through and have got the blessing of recovery, we can pinpoint the drug of that we really love. That changed everything, and for me, it was cocaine. It gave me the confidence. It gave me the I was separate from my identity, but I was also, whole. I felt like I could do anything I wanted during the first few years of using.
Yeah.
And the progression was very simple. I went where it was, and that took me all over the world. But I went wherever it was and where there was easy access. And so that meant where I could earn money and use. And so I worked in environments that were actually conducive to using. I'm a business developer, a salesperson.
I was going to say politics, but no, it wasn't politics. No, it was more creative.
It would have been just as good.
I'm sure, yeah.
But no, in the business development space, I worked as a broker, and in that environment, you're able to. It's a hedonistic environment, so it's very acceptable, and that took me all over the world. But in that process, I felt it was normal. I felt it was a very normal way to be. But if we go back to the beginning, what was always being denied was that child that had gone through that trauma.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got to my 30s, that's about 30 years old, I was in a lot of pain. The pain was so much that I had to use. There was no longer party time.
Yeah.
It was, I had to use to remove that pain.
To be okay. No?
Yeah. And so the unmanageability had started many years before, but I didn't really recognize it until I realized that I have to do this.
Yeah.
But then I have to do this, so I'm going to keep doing it, you know, rather than saying, maybe I should have a look at how I can avoid this. I just carried on. By the time I was 35, I had, in those last 5 years, I had moved countries 12 times. I had moved homes, girlfriends, jobs, the same quantity, if not more. Mm-hmm. But I'd continued with one thing, and that was the drugs.
Doesn't change.
Yeah, it doesn't change. Yeah. When I came to Barcelona, within 12 months, 11 months of getting here, I was in Narcotics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. Barcelona is a great place for me because it was a place where everything was available immediately, instantly. Mm-hmm. And that meant that it wasn't going to take long before the wheels fell off. And what I mean by that is that I crashed.
So you saw it coming, no? Like
I didn't know. No, I was still in complete auto mode. Okay. But I'm thankful for Barcelona. I'm thankful for this place because there was so much easy access. I'm not saying come to Barcelona. What I'm saying is for me, it was a great place.
Yeah.
Because it was the end for me, which was brilliant.
Yeah, it is a special place, Barcelona.
Yeah. So Narcotics Anonymous, when I walk through those doors, hopefully that route of progression allows, people to understand that, I wasn't a person that was particularly abused as a child. I went through a trauma, but that trauma wasn't visible to me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't visible to me until I actually got
clean. You start looking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it was visible because my family are the same color as you. Hmm. So to anyone else externally with half a brain, this man, this boy doesn't identify with this
setting.
Group, this. So I could feel that, but I didn't know how to express that. I didn't know how to work through that. Mm-hmm. And Narcotics Anonymous allowed me to do that. Mm-hmm. Really brought me home to that place.
Yeah, no, it is a very special place. And it's hard to, we were talking before recording how the things I've learned and heard in these meetings, which sometimes are not very welcoming because they're in this subsótano, I don't know the word. Basements of churches in dark, not very bright.
Yeah.
Low ceilings, kind of weird, different chairs, and you don't know what to expect when you go in there for the beginning, and it's kind of scary, But then what I've seen and learned in 10 years of going sporadically, sometimes more, sometimes less, to these, I've been to many cities. That's where I met you, when I picked up my medal of 10 years. And we were 4 in a room. I never went to that meeting before.
Right, yeah.
It's a nice place. Yeah. That meeting is quite nice. No,
yeah.
In what's this place, Barceloneta?
Yeah.
Well, I learned a lot of things, and I've acquired a lot of valuable knowledge in these places. From stories, 3-minute sharing of this guy from Cuba, and this guy in Madrid has been sleeping in a portal for months, and he still went to meetings, and he would, just apologize sometimes because he couldn't have taken a shower that day. And that guy then found a little job, went to a hostel, had a bed, then found a better job. And I saw that whole process. I saw also a guy around my age was diagnosed with very tough cancer. And the guy, after 4 or 5 years sober, started using again. And then he realized after 1 year that he said, I'm going to use until I die. So I'd rather be free before dying.
Right.
So when I went into recovery, I had this only one ticket, the only excuse for which I would use again is if I ever got really sick.
Okay.
And that guy that day taught me, that you don't, it's just your brain looking for an excuse to end up using. Because it's a very justified excuse. If it's a meteorite coming to the Earth, what's the point of not using, But the reality is that, first of all, you interpret how your brain is working in that moment, justifying something, that you really don't want. Mm. And dying with cancer is a very, very, quite a strong reason to use. But this guy saw it was a terrible idea. He said, "Look, I want to be free for the months I have left." And he had 4 or 5 months left. One day, one guy came and said, "Hey, he's passed away.
He's gone." Yeah.
And that it was quite intense for me, because it really demolished my only excuse if I ever was going to use again. And that was probably when my 6th, 7th year sober. It was still there.
You're still holding on.
I was
to
still,
that.
I was like, look, if I'm gonna die, I'd rather see what happens. At least not like before, maybe this, maybe that. But I had that idea,
Yeah. That thing of where you just have a reservation.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hold that one back. For me, it was if my mother or father died, I'm definitely using.
Yeah.
And 14 months into recovery, my mother died.
Well, I'm very sorry.
and I didn't use, because I that same thing. I went to meetings and people said, "Yeah, that happened to me."
Yeah.
And then someone shared, "That happened to me, and I used." And I so wish I hadn't. And that's all I needed to hear.
Yeah.
That actually, it's always better not to pick up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the brain is
tries
affected.
to trick you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that affection, or the way that the brain is triggered, in the addict mind, is always that, I will be better, I will feel better when I use.
Yeah, no,
I will be in a better place. Where that, so we understand that's a lie. We understand that that's not true. But over years and years and years and years and years of listening to that, it becomes very, very difficult to hear anything else.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about other recovery programs. I only know about Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. But I think unless we walk into these places and we start listening to the voices of the people that are actually going through that decision-making process every day, because it's a daily thing. Okay, after many years of recovery, I don't personally think about using every day. But when there is stress and there's trauma and there's, stuff happening, that's where my brain goes. So I think if we can get more people hearing those stories, hearing how hard it actually is to stop your brain from going to that place, and knowing what those tools are. There are some really clear tools, and one of them that I absolutely adore is phone someone. When you feel like you want to use, when you feel like you want to pick up, phone someone that isn't using, someone that has recovery. And so how do you get someone that has recovery? Meet some people in recovery.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but as soon as that phone call happens, you've got someone that you can trust, that you can say, "I'm feeling this. I don't want to use, but I feel like my brain is saying I should.
Yeah.
So how can I deal with this?" And it's just a conversation that stops you. It's saved my life so many times.
Yeah, well,
simple thing.
Yeah, it's because sometimes simple things are the most important and effective things, though. And the idea of sharing and the opportunity of having you in this podcast is trying to give information to people that are out there that might know someone or might have their own doubts, in order for them to have a glimpse of what a 17-year recovery person that goes through NA can share. Because if they can avoid going to an NA meeting, even better.
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit of a shame for me to see all this value of life experience in these meetings, which I'm much more, I guess, much more deep and shocking sometimes than what you could expect. But that value is a bit lost, because the people that are only hear these things have to go through a really bad process. I end up, hey, how do I stop this? In this meeting, and you end up, looking at internet, finding a meeting, don't know what you expect. You're kind of nervous. You have to share, not share. Well, look, NA is not, it's a wonderful place. It's something that saves millions of lives literally every year or every day. And if we could, share what it is a bit from the inside, to try to break the stigma a bit of addiction. So if I wouldn't know you and I see you down the street, the last thing I think is in you being a hardcore addict, or I don't know if it's hardcore, it's like an expression of saying, hey, this guy's a very straightforward addict, like I am. I don't know if I look like an addict, but the idea of, you see a guy on the street with a bottle of wine, living in the street, and you automatically put him in a categorize the guy, Well, you and I are like him. And there's a lot of people that go to the jobs and they suffer in silence a bit, like hemorrhoids. But they do the same, they categorize addiction. And it's addiction now there's a new issue that we've spoken in another episode about screens, because it's showing.
Yeah, it's frightening,
It's showing patterns at a very early age that are mechanically very similar to a cocaine line or a drink or any other substance. This prioritizing that usage, getting deep, quite straight up shots of dopamine. So it's the patterns. So the description of a screen usage, not all of screen usage, and certain things more than others and stuff. Social media, basically, are very, very similar to other users. So let's see what's going to happen. Maybe I think screens have shown a bit that everyone can really have the potential of being an addict.
Yeah, Ruy, the subject of brain pattern and triggers, the natural trigger of dopamine in the brain, causes an addict to want more and crave more and crave more. So for us, the idea of somebody coming into a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and saying, they might have some time clean and they're saying, I'm really struggling with sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Yeah. We're here talking, we've got people here that have been, mainlining heroin and
slamming.
What are you talking? Sugar. And it's the same thing with screens, that anything that creates unmanageability in your life, that you crave, that triggers that dopamine and stops you from, keeps you up till 3 a.m, which a screen can do. So I'm very much on board with that. I really, it's actually something that I find kind of difficult with labeling a group such as Narcotics Anonymous.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's a great way for people to enter into the recovery cycle and this recovery program. So we have Alcoholics Anonymous, we have Sex Addicts Anonymous, we have all sorts of, which is the entry point. But actually, I would love to see a program that just talks about addiction, because that's really what we're struggling with. That's what we're suffering from, culturally. The idea that you and I are the same as this guy or woman or man who is homeless on a bench, it is completely, it's correct. We are the same, and unless we can say this person is the same as the person that is up until 5 a.m. on a screen, the same things are happening in their brain. They get up the next day and they want to go straight back to that screen again. And that has meant that they haven't studied. If it's a student, they haven't slept, they haven't eaten, it's the same thing. It's unmanageability that's being created. Okay, the outcome at that point is that they're not necessarily homeless. But that's the progression. That's where this goes. And so, are we creating a
world of addicts?
World of addicts.
Let's see. Well, not you and I, but I think this.
I think there's a very strong, evidence that is what's coming. I mean, we're only, 10 years into screens?
10 years, yeah.
And
well, the social media in the mobile is 2013. Yeah.
Right. We're only just starting down that path, but what I've noticed, we talked about this as well, is the age of people coming into recovery. So there are some real positives about this accessibility of the screen, I can get the information about whether I might be bipolar, whether I might be an addict of this, whether I can find these things out at the drop of a hat, which is great.
Yeah.
So we're finding that people are coming into this place of recovery younger. I came in at 35, so I had years, you've got years of damage and stuff to work through.
Well, also good stories, I have to say.
And lots of great stories, lots of great stories, and we never forget those, Yeah. And actually what's interesting is I'm remembering more as the years go on,
Well, that's selective memory.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not realistic. There's a lot of damage, as you say, It's, But we also spoke before, we are examples of very, very lucky people in rehab, because I know close people around me, and I've seen throughout the years how things turn out much worse. We're lucky enough to be okay, have families. We are here talking in this great place, and there are others that are really, really in a bad place, And so addiction is, it's a tremendous, tremendous thing that happens in your life, and we are. I don't know what's the percentage of people that end up being okay, and recovering their life, because some don't, and that's tremendous. I saw recently an interview, like a quick one on the street, of a homeless person, and because of this 120,000 people in Skid Row in LA, and there was this guy saying, like, look, the majority of people don't understand that you're two wages, salaries away from being on the street like me. I just found myself looking at my expedition gear, like a mountain gear, because I was kicked out of my house. I had no money, and this is what I have, my bag. The guy didn't look like a person who's been on the street for 30 years. He looked like you and me with 2 weeks not shaving. So yeah, homelessness is an issue in America now. This fentanyl pandemia or epidemic. We have a following episode, before episode, we're recording this one, but there's an episode that goes behind, in front of yours, that is one of the ends of the academic series about fentanyl. And the other one is Hypnosedatives, which is benzodiazepines. Yeah, benzos. Yeah. Spain has become the #1 in the world in consumption of benzos and sleeping pills and sedatives in the world. So there are things happening that, makes it not only interesting to talk about addiction, but to try to understand it. Because I was cutting my hair the other day, and the girl that works in this hair salon heard my conversation, because the guy that cuts my hair is a friend of mine, which I can say hi from here, Manu Chochoni. He's a great guy. And the girl that works with him is 25. She said to me, all the people that I know take benzos before they go out now, which is a pattern that didn't happen before. And they get it, 85% of the first consumption of benzos is from the home. Right. So you just go. Prescription of some kind. Yeah, it's all prescription. Yeah. So you just go to your, parents' cabinet and open and take 10 benzos. No one notices. You share it with your friends. You get high, and then you drink, and that's a pattern that didn't exist. So let's see where that leads, So if you're young and doing this, you need to. It doesn't end up well. That's what you and I are lucky that we had good outcome.
I think that's very. It's very true. Speaking to those people that are living with addiction, but are managing, which I think is what we're referring to. People that are not obviously, their lives are not obviously unmanageable, but internally they know the unmanageability. So they know that they are dependent on a substance of some kind. They know that, they are in a cycle of deceit. Maybe it's with their money, their finances, maybe it's with their partner. These are very, very good signs or bad signs, off-takes of addiction when we're in these kind of patterns and these cycles. And so speaking to those people, the progression is, it's sudden sometimes. It can, in fact, very often it can be, as you say, from one day to the next. Yeah. Purely and simply because we're in a controlled state in that when we're using these substances, when we're in that cycle, we're in a controlled state. And it's a state that's separating us from ourselves. And so that separation from ourselves is, if we've never really spent time getting to know ourselves, and I don't mean sitting on top of a windy mountain with my legs crossed, I'm referring to spending time discussing who I am, discussing with others who I am and what I am and where I'm from. If we haven't spent time doing that, then the control is always going to be with that substance. So I urge anyone that feels, maybe they've got that question, am I? I urge you to have a look, because in doing that, you may find you're not.
Well, I have to say that if you have a doubt, it tends to be.
But you may find you're not. And it's not for me to say or for anyone else to say that you are. But if you don't, I guarantee, and it is a 100% guarantee, we have an expression which is jails, institutions, or death. And that sounds so heavy. It sounds so dramatic. But it is a reality. It really is. The cycle of addiction is one that, which I was illustrating at the top of the recording, is I'm a soft addict in many respects. I didn't end up homeless. I didn't end up in a situation, my bottom, as we express it, the bottom in my life, wasn't where I was, jumping off a cliff, I was emotionally, I was spiritually bankrupt, but I physically, in my physical outward appearance, I still had the trappings of life. So, and I was a professional, and I am a professional, in a professional working environment. For me to get recovery, I had to stop working. I wasn't in a position where I had to get recovery because I'd been sent to a recovery program by a judge, which is where a lot of people come from, which is why I say jails, institutions. Then the other side is where people come to recovery because they have gone through psychological trauma because of their using. I wasn't one of those people. And, it really is like that. This is the truth for us. So I urge people that are in that position where they're asking that question, come and have a look. And it may not be Narcotics Anonymous. It may be, going and having a chat with a professional psychologist and saying, hey, this is what's happening. Anyone worth their salt, if they can see that you're in an addictive process, will not diagnose drugs, will not diagnose, Valiums and all of those sort of things, which a GP, a general practitioner, will do. Psychologists tend not to. They tend to say, okay, let's have a look at what's happened.
Let's have a look.
Yeah, let's dive in. And I suggest, asking that question a few times of yourself.
And in the case, sorry to cut you, in the case that you are, what I think is very important is that for me, clearly, it's obviously my kids, but the most important thing that's happened to me in my life is recovery. It really is a blessing. So it sounds also a bit cliche, But the worst moment of my life was where things started really changing. And there's a great theory that I read recently of a physicist that is called the beta, like the second letter in Greek.
Yeah.
Beta region paradox. And so it basically says that the more fucked up you are, the better. Because because you change.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
if you're in a shitty job but it's 75%, you might be there for 20 years. If your job is absolute shit and it's 90% shit, you change in 2 weeks. And maybe you take some time to find a new one, and you go through a lot of stress, but at the end you change and your life goes on and it improves. So addiction, I think it's a very good model to apply to addiction. If you're a slight alcoholic, let's say, you might be 45 years drinking almost every day until your liver bursts or something. You don't stop, or you don't analyze yourself. We were talking before, what you explained very clearly, the golden ticket that you have when you're an addict, then you realize you're an addict, then you are like, okay, and there's all these tools that I can try to improve. All these people there. And that's what I was talking before, the value of NA meetings. Even though narcotics, I also think it sounds a bit, it categorizes too much.
Yes, yes.
In the reality, I don't think I've ever met someone that took narcotics without alcohol. So why separate alcoholics and narcotics? It's because chronologically it started AA. It was the big issue after the dry law, in America. But labeling addiction like that might not be very beneficial, but it doesn't really matter. The thing is that you have a golden ticket, and I think it's the most the greatest opportunity to do this introspection, and say, hey, who am I, in order to become really autonomous, which is it's being the way you are, so being the way you think you are. So taking that into place, not only economic autonomy, it's also real autonomy. So I don't need anything to be happy, grateful, the guy I am, socially, and being there for people. I don't need too much, and when you're not autonomous, even if it's games or your phone, Instagram, or spending or whatever it is, or even going crazy with sports, that could also lead to not being completely autonomous. And I think addiction and recovery leads you there, to who you are. And then you appreciate things that, I also try to explain sometimes how strange it might be to other people that you really have this conscious moments of, hey, everything's okay, I'm doing okay. And I'm really enjoying this moment where nothing's really happening right now, but I'm really in peace and happy about it. And that never happened before. On the contrary, you go from this roller coaster of being bad, worse, So recovery is a luxury. It is something. There is a process. If you want to talk a bit about that the first months or even weeks are sometimes tremendous, because there's like all these changes and all kinds physical. You might not sleep for 2 months. You might be trying to eat a lot of sugar suddenly, or not eating at all. You don't know who you are, that kind of thing. But they get to a moment, I don't know, for some people it's 3-6 months, maybe more, that you really start realizing how lucky you are, and that whatever you add to your life, it's thought through.
Yes.
So if you do realize you're an addict, and you say, instead of saying, oh, fuck, I'm not going to have fun anymore. No, you're going to have real fun. Whenever it is time for fun, you'll enjoy it really. It's a positive message that I want to send. It's like, hey, it's really, you become part of a sort of weird club, when I go to NA and then I see them sometimes, not very often, in the street. There's a connection there with a guy that I'm like,
away,
that guy was in my meeting, and no one really knows, and in the street around you, and you feel there's something there. But it creates this duality. I have written here, the duality diminishes a bit. At least you start handling correctly. At least the way I see it is when you're in active addiction, there is, 99% of the person that you don't want to be really on control. The other percentage is there. And when you go into recovery, that balances out a bit until you realize, even though years can go by and you still have thoughts that lead you to emotions that are negative, you still don't use. And then you cancel that thought, that emotion. But the duality I was thinking about.
I think I look at it very much like a scale. Initially, when one discovers, accepts, realizes that one is an addict, that there's unmanageability, that things aren't going right. When we get to that point, the scale is heavily weighted towards the oh shit. Oh fuck. There's nothing on this side that's going to balance that, because all you can see is that heaviness. And so the cycle is you're going to keep using because you can only see that thing. And so the using becomes the light. It's I'll use, I'll feel better. Yeah. Oh, I'll use, I'll feel better. But then it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And so you need to use more to bring, So that's how the progression was for me. I think it's the same for many. But then when we come into recovery, speaking to, what you're saying of, the first few months, 6 months, whatever it may be, it's probably the scale is as heavy as it's ever going to be when you walk in those doors. But because of the communication you have, the contact you have with others, because you hear stories of others, the truth from them saying, I was like you, I did this, my life changed, the balance starts to rise. But it's not drugs anymore. It's not the substance anymore that's lifting that. It's actually your realization, the clarity of mind. You know, there's an expression that I hear a lot, which is, you know, when I'm in recovery, when I come into recovery or before, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. You know, I spend my whole time in that cycle of just being not happy, you know, and the only thing that pulls me out is that little bit of joy in using. And that might be sex, it might be sport, it might be screens, it could be anything. So again, I'm not just referring to drugs here, you know, it could be anything. But then when we get past the realization, we're now into, you know, some months of working this thing and not using that substance. At the beginning, we're like, shit, well, how am I ever going to live without that thing? But we start to see that actually I'm living without this thing and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm enjoying myself. I'm enjoying my time with me, you know?
Yeah, you generate new rewards.
Yeah.
And that's very important. Yeah.
You know, there's this thing of, okay, so I'm now able to choose to not pick up. I'm now able to choose to say, I don't want to do this. And I've got a reason why I want to say, I don't want to do this thing. So, you know, that's the beginning. But I'm still, you know, the person is still at that point, you know, for me anyway, I hadn't lived many years of life, hardly any, without using. Yeah. You know, and I'd got 20 odd years of using at that point, you know. And so I had to learn. And one has to learn a new way of living. And when you're a fully grown, you know, adult, that's a really difficult thing to do. Yeah. I speak to this, you know, I'm English. So when I was at school, I learned English and I was forced to learn French, you know, to a very low standard.
You don't need more.
And then I travel the world and I don't need any language at all, you know. So learning is a very difficult thing for adults. Learning a language is difficult. I've lived here for 17 years and I'm still struggling with Spanish, you know. So for me to learn a new way of living was just, how am I going to do this? What actually triggered the desire to learn? Initially, it was desperation. Yeah. Because I was desperate to stop using. But then it was, I'm actually enjoying this. I can go and have fun here. I can meet with people that are not a threat to me. Yeah. You know, I'm developing relationships. I'm falling in love. You know, these things happened in my early recovery. And the falling in love part isn't necessarily with the opposite sex. It was with myself. Yeah. You know, I was able to start seeing the value in me. Yeah. Now, that wasn't my ego-driven value. That was when somebody said to me, Andy, thanks for helping me move house. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. You know, I really felt that thank you. Yeah. Whereas when I was using and I helped someone, it was like, oh, fuck, I got to help that fucking guy. Yeah. You know, instead of that, there was value there. Yeah. And so I started to really value myself. Then came the identity piece for me. And this is separate for everyone, it's different. But the identity piece was a key thing for me. Who am I? And that meant going back into my past. That meant going and talking to my family and talking to the people that in many ways I'd really hurt and I'd really let down. So I was able to recover a lot of those relationships and a lot of those really meaningful things in my life. And in that process, I got to love myself
Discover
more.
Yourself. Yeah.
And in that loving process of getting to know myself more, I was able to therefore show that to other people of myself, you know. This might sound all kind of, you know, nice and fluffy, but, you know, I stress, Ruy, you know this, it's fucking hard work. Yeah. You know, it ain't fun to start with. And there are many things that come up in the life of a recovering addict that are really painful. But the great thing about this is that pain is just a feeling, and it doesn't continue.
Yeah.
You know, it goes on for a period and then it stops. You know, one of the great things I love to share with people is, you know, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
You know, when I was using to dampen my feelings. I was using to remove those feelings. And so when I came into recovery, those feelings were still there. You know, fuck am I? What do I look like? You know, I'm a liar. I've stolen. I've cheated. I've done this. I've done that. You know, all of those feelings were still there, but I'd made a decision not to use to. So how am I going to overcome those feelings? What I learned was that they're just feelings.
Yeah, thoughts.
They're just thoughts and feelings. And the fact is, we've got to feel these feelings. They are not facts. They are just feelings.
Yeah.
But we have to feel them. And that realization is the thing that has allowed me to stay in this process and become a father like yourself, you know, get married, travel with my family, you know, have businesses, prosper, you know, but prosper not for myself, but to become a real relevant part of the human, you know, story, you know, be able to give, be able to be a part of. So one of the things that I discovered, which why I say this, that I have a golden ticket, is that I found that I'm not a bad guy. You know, I found this thing out, that lie that I'd been telling myself because of all my years using, that I was a despicable, horrible person, that it wasn't true. But in finding that, I then started to ask myself a question: what do I want to be? How do I want to live? And the choices of how I want to live and how I want to be are choices that I really discerned. I really studied. I really said, I would like to live this way because it suits the person that I've fallen in love with, you know? And that is what I mean. That's what I meant by the golden ticket. It's like, nobody gets that.
Yeah.
You know, so the better model of
Paradox,
you have to be beaten to find that. No, you don't. I don't think you have to be completely squashed before you pick yourself up. I think you can, you know, listen to things like this and realize that actually I just need to have a bit of courage, step out of this and start asking some questions of myself.
The tendency, because I don't think you need to be beat up until that's the way it's been happening to us. So you end up in NA when you're beaten, and then you start recovery.
Yeah.
If you have a glimpse of something like this podcast, or you go into certain recommendations that, you know, some books, or you start looking for explanations, you might avoid ending up, you know, with 35 after 15 years of using. You know, it's 'cause I think it is like that. And we were speaking a bit about spirituality, which is, in my case, one of the things in NA, they talk a lot about the higher power. It creates a rejection for some people that don't have a religion-based upbringing, but in my experience, which I also haven't had a very religious upbringing, spirituality appears in recovery in different ways. And the way it's appeared to me is like it answers certain doubts. And so for an addict to stop using is already quite miraculous. No.
An incredible feat.
Yeah. And for some to be 20, 30, you know, and go through changes and the experience that they acquire because of those changes is tremendous. So things that they can achieve in life when they were homeless in the street. Well, all these stories, you know, they quite answer this incredible things that happen in recovery. But I agree with you with trying to get the word a bit out that, hey, it's not that difficult to end up in an NA meeting. It can happen to absolutely everybody. And I think there's like a 10% of genetically superheroes that just reject substance for some reason. They use it, but it doesn't stick, you know. But to the rest of the people, it's easier than it looks, you know. You don't have to be beaten. I wasn't beaten. I had a very nice upbringing in life, and I was very lucky. And at the end, you know, I almost killed myself drinking and using substances, you know. So yeah, spirituality, I haven't really figured it out. what I think about it. I think there's something there. I like it, and I try to learn more about it and try to figure out myself regarding spirituality. But look, we met in a moment that was very peculiar, and now we're here. And this might help people that we don't know and that we will never meet modify their conduct and understand, hey, why not learn about addiction? Even if you're not an addict or you basically don't use, learn about it, because it can help people. And it's a very interesting, it's a field in science which is incredibly not developed. You know, they know absolutely everything about the body, basically, and even, you know, the stars in thousands of kilometers, millions of kilometers away. But they don't understand how you and I can become addicted to a substance and Victor not, you know? And we use the same, I have a twin brother.
Yeah.
So we had certain similar experiences, and then suddenly, you know, he diverted into becoming a great civilian, and I diverted into becoming a menace to society. You know?
Yeah.
I think there was a disc. No,
I mean,
like a record.
who knows? I don't know that. I have no comprehension of why one and not the other. But
no one knows.
No one knows. But the spirituality side, I have my own experience. Again, you know, my family are not religious. My adopted family, the family that raised me, you know, we were funerals and weddings. You know, this is the time that we went to church. But then at school, I went to Christian boarding schools, so I was forced every Sunday to go, and I think twice in the week. And it was just an opportunity to you know, play around with my friends. You know, there was no connection. Interestingly, when I got to 18, 19, one of my close friends he'd never told me he was a Christian or had any faith, but he called me up and he said, "Hey Andy, I'm looking after a friend's house." And I was like, oh, "Okay, this is on. We got a party.
Oh, you have a place.
Man,
Yeah.
This is it." And I said, "What time shall I turn up?" He said, "Oh yeah, come over, you know, 8 or whatever." And I said, "Great. How long have you got it for?" "I got it for the whole weekend." "Okay, great." So I turn up thinking this is gonna be off the chain. It's gonna be fantastic, and there's just me. And he was like, "Yeah, no, I want to just spend some time with you, man."
Oh, and you had this whole
and I had
thing in
this
your
whole
mind.
thing
No?
in my head. And anyway, so I'm like, "Okay, John, yeah, let's just do that." And you know, it was cool. We're just hanging out. We went to the pub. We came back, and he said, "You know, to be honest, Andy, I just wanted to see how you're doing." And that blew my mind. This person had chosen me of all his friends. We were very close. We'd gone to the same schools. You know, we'd known each other a long time. But he'd chosen me to ask that question to. And I thought that nobody really thought that much about me enough to do that, you know. And so I was taken aback, and I said, "You know, actually things aren't great." And he said, "Look, I just want you to know that I love you." And I'm like, "John, hey, dude, you know, I'm not into that." He said, no, I love you. I care for you. I want you to know that. And I said, "Okay, that's really cool." And he said, "Look, if you don't understand what I mean, I want you to read this thing." And he gave me a part of the Bible, which is Corinthians 13, which is love. And it's a description of what love is. And I read it and it didn't mean anything to me. Really, it was like, okay, that's out there. He's telling me he loves me, and I love him. I think he's a lovely guy. You know, we're great friends. And then the next day was Sunday, and he said, "I'm going to go to church." And I said, "Yeah, I seem to remember that you do go to church." And it's such a fog to me, because I had been using LSD from 15. So my understanding of what was going on around me was really, you know, now when I look back, I was really not seeing it clearly. And he had obviously seen that I was in pain. And so he'd taken the time to do this thing. I went to this church service, and I felt connected. There were some very pretty girls, so I was connected to being there. And then at the end of the service, I needed to go home. So I sat at the station and I prayed. And I asked whatever was out there, I said, "Look, I don't know what has just happened, but I would like to know if you are there, if there's anything, you need to show me, and you need to show me now. Otherwise, I just can't do this, you know. And my feet started to tingle. And then my knees and my whole body. I'm sitting at a railway station in the middle of the countryside, and I'm thinking, what? I haven't taken any drugs.
Yeah.
I had a beer last night. What is happening? And then as years went on, every time I asked for that, I got that. What I've understood is, this is my experience. I'm not saying this will be anyone else's experience. What I've understood is that love is what I understand as spirituality. Is the hardest thing that we could ever express. The hardest thing we can ever do is to love. It isn't butterflies and rainbows. You know, it's really tough, you know, to put ourselves in the place of others. Love is a very difficult thing. But what I didn't get was that love, perfect love, meets me where I am. Yeah? So that love, that spirituality met me where I was. And I was a baby that needed to be touched, that needed to be cared for, that needed to be held. And that's why I have it right now. I have that feeling right now because it is love for me. And I've had that through I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional, but I have that through my life. It's through my recovery, through my life, even when I was using, the worst times when I was using, I asked and this thing came. So for me, spirituality is being vulnerable. You know, it's being ready to accept that I am as connected to the universe as a tree, as a flower, I am nature. I'm part of this thing. And if I deny myself that, if I separate myself from that, if I don't ask the universe, love, to come to me, I'm in a position where I'm going to be bankrupt of the most precious thing that I can have. Now, that doesn't need to take the format of a religion. It doesn't need to take the format of that dogma.
Although sometimes it does for people.
For some
and
people,
it works.
yes, it does. But it doesn't have to.
No, yeah.
I really stress this. It's this thing of, there is no one thing. There is, you know, love is one thing, but love takes on every form, has to. You know, we are different. We have different experience. We have different politics, views. You know, love meets us where we are. And for me, that could be any faith. It really could be, as long as love is first. Now, when I say love, I don't mean butterflies and rainbows. I mean, you know, someone has taken your child from you. The ability to forgive and love that person. Someone has really hurt you. You have really hurt someone, and they still love. This is love. You know, this is what I'm referring to. You know, forgiveness, the courage to look at yourself and love yourself. You know, the courage to say, whatever it is that you've done, I am not going to judge you for that. I'm going to accept you for you. You know, these are hard things to do. Yeah. And, you know, the movies kind of give us love in a very soft way. Yeah. But so for spirituality, for me, is around that. It's quite a long-winded story, but it's I mean, very much it.
I think you've named principles of recovery, which I think are the basis of recovery, which is love for yourself. You start loving yourself, for people around you. I think you have to be humble, which is something recovery teaches you. I think you have to have balls. That's courage. It's more a better word. And I think you have to have certain faith in that things are going to be better, because at the beginning you can't see anything. You have to trust people you don't know telling you things that might happen, which they do. So I think I agree with it's a big topic, spirituality. But I think for me it's also been it's been appearing in a way. It's like I've seen myself talking to 100 young people in a church, and not in a church, in a place in a church. Right. And I never spoke in my life in front of more than 15 in some wedding or something. I've seen manifestations of love in which have made incredible impact in me in recovery, from people I know from a long time ago, from people that I don't, that I just recently met. So it is worth getting in recovery only to see these things, you know. And after sitting here with academics, which give you this scientific approach to what addiction is and the harms that it does, and the lucky that we are, because we've had psychiatrists talking about 20-year-olds that are having dementia because of usage of the new drugs, you know. So it's obviously neurotoxins that are bad for you, but you don't have to end up in an AA meeting to do this step forward into searching of who you are, how can you be better, and how you can enjoy really life. I think hopefully in the future, well, I'm going to talk about some books that bring up this subject, but I think the approach will be more to treat people as adults with choice and information and education, so that the demand of substance use goes to the floor, because people, once you know really what you're risking, the ratio between risk and reward is absolute madness.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to a certain extent, Ruy. Agree to a certain extent.
That's what we're here for, to disagree and agree.
For me, there's this underlying factor of we touched on trauma. You know, there are so many people that are they have no option. They are going to use because of the circumstance that they come from. And no matter how many books I put in front of them today, how much education they get today, they are not going to be able to take the step to make that change because of their circumstance. And I'm referring to people that, you know, are born into very criminal environments. You know, that drug use is so completely accepted. You know, abusive environments, parents that are addicts. This is a continual cycle, right? So I believe that there is change to come from education, but I don't think it's a straight away. I think
it's the only way, Andy.
It takes time, you know.
I think it's the only way. How are you gonna? You can't force people.
No, you can't.
You can't reduce the offer, because there's more and more substances on the street, cheaper stuff, more potent stuff like fentanyls. So you might not change everybody, obviously, but the way to change is through education, I believe. And yeah, why not love also? You know, because this is efforts that I put here, that you put here, that other people that are helping finance this project, the time that everyone puts into this, and there's what reward. I mean, I'm not especially keen on being publicly, you know, spread to people in their own phones to, you know, see how bad I ask questions or not. At the end, everybody does an effort without really seeing the reward. So I guess that's love in a way.
It is, yeah, 100%.
But the idea is that people can modify, if using an app in your phone modifies who you vote, or I'm just resuming it very quickly, but it can modify the way you live through everyday life, the way you socialize, the way you meet people, friends or relationships, the way you choose your career. The phone and the social media can do this. I think that this package of information of a conversation like this out there,
it's so valuable.
I think it can modify certain behaviors.
Definitely. I suppose we just have to, you know, focus on, okay, there is a mass audience. There's a mass audience that will be able to hear this, and they might hear a clip, and that clip is a seed. You know, it's a seed to help them or someone that they know, and that's really where the education begins. Some will, you know, grab that and go for it, and, you know, it'll become their everything for a period of their life. And then there are others that will be like, oh, I remember that thing. Oh, and it'll become a conversation that they have, you know, watching the football or whatever it might be. So if there is a definite need. When, you know, it's not an issue around education. It's more, how do we get those people that are they're inheriting this. How do we change that cycle? And for me, that's, you know, the issue of parental guidance. It's the issue of, you know, being able to support those people that are coming into recovery now before they make the same decisions and choices that their parents made. You know, it's that. It's So from a psychological perspective, being able to get to people, being able to communicate with people to say, hey, have conversation. So opening doors for people to sit not in this environment, but sit one-on-one with professionals that can help them discuss the issues that they're going through. You know, I'm not very erudite, so
what do you mean by
read and absorb, and therefore it's in. I love YouTube. You know, it's absolutely great for me.
It's a learning tool.
It's a learning tool, so I think this definitely has that place. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. But then I struggle a little bit with the okay, we need to get literature to people. We need more of this.
Yeah, I think so.
Much more of this.
Well, now that you speak about literature, I can use the moment to recommend a couple of books that I bought. This is the Spanish version, but you do know this.
I know that one. Yeah.
This is I don't know if the word is correct to say the Bible, but it's like the manual of NA, and it's like any book. You don't need to go to NA to take a look.
I think you can get it online as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And then I bought, as we have an English guest, I don't know if you know David Nutt, the Professor David Nutt.
I do, yeah. It's
very conflictive character, no? Yeah, I have these two, which is Drink, the New Science of Alcohol and Your Health, and Drugs Without the Hot Air, making sense of legal and illegal drugs. Well, he's very conflictive. He's quite he's a neuropharmacologist, and he's had very high positions in the Ministry of Health and different government corporations as a chief advisor, and it's a very scientific. I have another book of him, and he explains his childhood as a prominent scientist when he was really, really young. So there's this guy that he kind of likes what he does, but he's very conflictive. He got kicked out for certain comments, like horse riding is more dangerous than ecstasy. He made these public announcements, But at the end, what I think is interesting about him is the idea that in the UK, you know better than me, cannabis, for example, is categorized as heroin, A1, no?
Yeah, it's a Class A drug, yeah.
Well, this puts a lot of people in jail, basically.
It
doesn't.
Not necessarily.
Well, he brings this debate there, like alcohol and tobacco should be more criminalized in a way 100%. From the public view than cannabis in a way, no? So, well, it's an interesting guy.
They're two very good books. For sure,
I mean, it's a different approach to addiction. Although he says cannabis is very dangerous, it's not like
it's an entry drug,
Yeah, I agree with that. Even though I have to admit that it's one of the things. He's like, no, for all my life I thought no, but it really is.
It is, yeah. And again, it depends on the person,
circumstances. No.
Yeah.
This other guy, David Nutt led me to Carl Hart. I don't know if you...
No, I haven't seen that, but I'd like to...
He's a Columbia professor, very interesting. He's also, drug use for grown-ups. It sounds terrible in a podcast for prevention, but in reality, what they do is they have this focus on education. It's like, you can't just put people in jail for smoking cannabis, which has happened in America and for many years. No, so they have a very scientific approach to it. I think it's interesting to have this view, or at least this glimpse of opinions. No, this is a very interesting book, The Chaos Machine. I'm in the middle, and I like technology a lot, and I try to recommend at least one book of technology.
I'm definitely picking that one up.
It's interesting. At the beginning, it's very specific in crisis in technological companies that have created certain crises, but then it opens it a bit more into there's a big change in YouTube, for example. They created an objective, like a corporate objective of making 1 billion hours of views, 1 billion views every 24 hours. That was the objective. Suddenly in YouTube it came up, so that changed everything.
Yeah.
Now they really are, since that got into place, they really are making people stay as long as possible.
Everything they can do, yeah.
And then why not? This one is a more friendly not so intense book, but it's about coffee. I love coffee. I think it's an interesting caffeine. It's an interesting substance.
What a substance! Yeah,
it's a lot. If you
take like the sugar kind of scenario as well,
or it can be even worse. I don't know. Or I think Andrew Huberman, this neuroscientist from Stanford, says that 400 milligrams a day is the top level. Otherwise, if you pass this, it's a bit it's damaging, for you. But it's quite a nice book. It's got historic facts. England is the history of coffee in England, which is interesting, and I liked it a lot. I have this one too. I mean, we could talk forever. We've passed our time a bit, but I'm very thankful that you came, and I wish we could do more.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Ruy. I'm definitely up for coming back. I think we've got lots more to chat on.
We've opened some windows there.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, and we'll try to make another one soon, okay?
My pleasure. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Aunque por ahora se mantienen en el anonimato, me gustaría agradecer a nuestros patrocinadores de este programa, sin los cuales este proyecto no hubiera sido posible. Vamos a distribuirlo de forma gratuita y estará disponible en las plataformas más conocidas como Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iVoox. Al final del programa podréis suscribiros al mismo.